My name is Rowan, and I'm 29 years old. And if I'd known what was on that VHS tape, I never would have pressed play. It was from my 5th birthday, the last one before my mother started locking the attic door. I thought watching it would bring back a few good memories. Instead, it showed me something I can't forget, a figure standing right behind me, not a guest, not a shadow, someone that wasn't supposed to exist. When I asked my aunt about it, she didn't answer. She just cried, and that's when I realized some family secrets don't stay buried. They wait for you. 3 weeks ago, I came back to my mother's house, the one I grew up in, to pack what was left of her things. The house has been quiet since the funeral, but not in a peaceful way. It's the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, reminding you that someone used to fill the silence. That morning, I decided to start with the attic, the one place my mother never let me clean when she was alive. The wooden ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed up, flashlight between my teeth. The air smelled of dust and old paper, thick and stale, like time had stopped breathing there. Stacks of boxes surrounded me, labeled in her neat handwriting: winter clothes, Christmas decor, Rowan, school projects. But there was one box, sitting alone in the corner, darker than the rest. The marker on it had faded, but when I wiped the dust away, I could still read the words, Rowan's 5th birthday. I didn't remember much about that day, just flashes of pink balloons and the taste of strawberry frosting. I sat cross-legged on the floor, heart thudding a little faster than it should, and opened the box. Inside were old toys, brittle from time, and a few crayon drawings I must have made back then. Uneven stick figures, messy hearts, and one drawing of my family standing beside a large, dark shape that didn't look like a person or a tree. I stared at it longer than I wanted to. Beneath those papers were 2 dusty VHS tapes, each with a label written in my mother's handwriting. One read, Birthday, 1999. The other was blank. I hadn't seen a VHS player in years, but I remembered one stored in the downstairs cabinet. I carried the box down, leaving dusty footprints on the attic steps, and wiped the cobwebs off the machine. When I pushed the tape into the slot, the sound of the gears spinning instantly brought me back to childhood. The hum, the static hiss, the low flicker of the television screen warming to life. The screen glowed. A shaky home video appeared, filmed by someone who clearly didn't know how to hold a camera steady. I recognized our old living room, the faded floral wallpaper, the crooked bookshelf, the birthday banner drooping across the ceiling. And there I was, a tiny version of myself, wearing a pink dress with ribbons in my hair, sitting at a table surrounded by balloons. My mother's voice filled the room, through the speakers. Soft, warm, laughing. Smile for Daddy, sweetheart, she said. My father's voice came from behind the camera, quieter, lower. All right, kiddo, big smile for your 5th birthday. I watched, smiling despite the ache in my chest. There were family friends in the background, aunts, uncles, neighbors I barely remembered. Everyone looked so alive, so happy. But when the camera panned across the room, my smile faded. My father's expression wasn't right. His eyes kept flicking toward something off-screen, his smile tight, strained. Even at 5, I hadn't noticed it. But now, from the distance of years, it was impossible to miss. The camera moved again. The cake came into view, candles flickering. My mother leaned in, lighting them one by one. She whispered, "Make a wish, honey." I saw myself close my eyes, take a deep breath, and blow. Everyone cheered. And then, as the smoke from the candles cleared, something caught my eye. Behind my 5-year-old self, near the doorway, was a tall, dark shape. It wasn't moving. It wasn't clapping. It just stood there, still, silent, like a shadow that didn't belong. At first, I thought it might be of the old film, maybe in the hallway. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. The shape was darker than the rest of, with no visible, no face, not even a reflection of light on clothing. Just an absence. I leaned forward, pulse rising. Who were you? Then suddenly the tape flicked. Static filled the breaking the image into snowy static before cutting to black. The old TV hummed in the silence, and I realized I was gripping the remote too hard. My knuckles white. The room felt colder. I hit rewind on the player, the familiar whirring sound filling the air. My throat was dry, my heartbeat too loud. When I pressed play again, I tried to watch calmly, to rationalize. Maybe it was a guest standing in the doorway. Maybe it was my uncle. Maybe the shadow was from a lamp. The video played again, the laughter, the candles, my small hands clapping, and then, there it was, still there. The figure hadn't moved, but this time something made me pause the tape. When the camera shifted slightly, just before the static appeared, the shadow seemed closer. Not much, Just a few inches. Enough to feel deliberate. Enough to make my stomach twist. I froze, staring at the screen as my 5-year-old self laughed in blissful ignorance. I could almost hear my mother's laughter echoing faintly in the corners of the house. That was when a chill ran down my spine, not just from the cold, but from the sudden feeling that I wasn't alone. The air around me felt heavy, still, charged with a quiet hum I couldn't explain. I turned off the TV, the silence swallowing the room whole. For a long time, I just sat there in the half-dark, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock downstairs. When I finally looked back at the blank TV screen, my reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, frightened. I tried to laugh at myself to shake it off. "You're imagining things," I muttered. But deep down, something told me this wasn't over. I rewound the tape once more, convinced I was imagining it, but that figure was still there, and this time, it almost looked like it was facing me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow standing behind my 5-year-old self, tall, silent, wrong. By morning, my eyes burned from exhaustion, and my head ached from thinking about what I'd seen. The first thing I did after making coffee was turn the TV back on. The VHS player whirred to life with a sound that made my stomach tighten. I pressed play again, determined to prove to myself that it was nothing, that maybe the shape was a trick of the camera, a bad angle, a blur of movement. The tape started, flickering between color and static. My mother's laughter filled the room again, soft and familiar. My little self giggled as the candles flickered, just as before. Then, the figure, still there, still watching. I grabbed the remote and hit pause. The image froze mid-frame, balloons in the corner, cake on the table, my tiny face half turned toward the camera, and just behind me, that same tall outline in the doorway. I leaned forward, squinting. The shape didn't blur like static. It had edges, a body, shoulders. I pressed zoom, though the VHS player wasn't really made for it. The closer I got, the grainier it became, until the pixels started to dissolve. But even through the distortion, I could tell one thing for sure. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, no features at all, just a void where a face should have been. My hands went clammy. I sat back, trying to breathe. "It's just a shadow," I whispered. "Just an artifact from the old tape." But the words didn't sound convincing, even to me. I needed someone else to see it, someone who could tell me I was overreacting. So I called my best friend Nora and told her I'd found something strange on an old family video. She sounded skeptical, but she came over anyway. When she arrived, I led her straight to the living room. "You have to see this," I said, fumbling with the VHS player. She sat on the couch, arms crossed, sipping the coffee I made her. "You're acting like you found a ghost or something. Just watch." The tape began to play again. I didn't take my eyes off the screen, waiting for her reaction. When the figure appeared, I pointed. "There, you see it?" Nora leaned forward. "That?" she said after a moment. "It's just a shadow, Ro. Probably someone moved, or the lighting messed up. VHS cameras were terrible for that." I could tell by her tone that she didn't believe it was anything more. "But it's too clear," I argued. "Look at how still it is. It's not moving. Everyone else is." Nora shrugged. "You've been in this house for weeks, alone. You're grieving. It's easy to start seeing things." That hit a nerve. I wanted to be angry, but deep down, she was right. I was alone, and grief can make your mind bend in strange ways. After she left, though, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the tape over and over until the mechanical sound of the VHS whirring began to blend with the ringing in my ears. Hours passed. The room grew darker. I hadn't eaten. Each time I pressed play, I found myself leaning closer, as if I might somehow catch the figure moving. My eyes strained against the flicker, the hiss of the old film, the static lines crawling up the screen. At one point, I could have sworn the figure's outline had shifted, just slightly. I told myself it was the tape degrading, but the pit in my stomach said otherwise. Eventually, my exhaustion won. I fell asleep on the couch, the static sound buzzing faintly from the TV in the background. When I woke, it was early morning again, the sun barely a gray line behind the curtains. I couldn't stop thinking about what Nora had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe it really was just film damage. So I did what any rational person would do. I started researching. I spent hours online looking up VHS distortion, ghosting effects, double exposures. I read entire threads about visual artifacts, old lenses, and camera flares, but none of the examples looked anything like what I'd seen. None of them formed figures. Frustrated, I decided to take the tape to a professional. There was a small photo and video restoration shop downtown. the kind of place that still had shelves of film reels and smelled faintly of chemicals. The technician, a middle-aged man with a trimmed beard and a magnifying glass hanging from his neck, greeted me politely. When I explained what I wanted, to have the tape digitized for clarity, he nodded. "Old VHS, huh?" he said, slotting it into a machine. "You'd be surprised what these old things can hide once we sharpen them up." I didn't tell him what I thought it was hiding. He began transferring the footage, humming under his breath. After a few minutes, his hum stopped. He squinted at the screen, adjusting the playback. "That's odd," he murmured. My stomach dropped. "What?" He paused the video and leaned closer to the monitor. "Usually with VHS static, the noise is random. You get bright flickers or color streaks. But this..." He pointed at the doorway where the shadow stood. "This isn't noise. It has a shape." "So it's a person?" I asked, voice small. He looked at me, cautious. "It looks like one." I swallowed hard. Could it be someone standing there? Maybe someone the camera caught by accident? "Maybe," he said slowly, "but the edges are too clean for that. It's not blending into the background the way shadows usually do. It's solid." My hands trembled slightly as I took the digitized copy home. I told myself I'd watch it once, just once, and then put it away for good. When I played the digital file on my laptop, the image was clearer than before, the colors sharper, the sound cleaner. I held my breath as the familiar scene began again. The laughter, the cake, the candles, the tiny version of me smiling at the camera. And then the figure appeared. It was sharper now, clearer, the edges too defined, too real. I paused the video, my eyes scanning every pixel. The space between me and the figure looked smaller than before. I checked, rewound, and paused again. The distance was definitely different. It wasn't just me. It had moved. The room felt colder again. I turned up the heat, but the air felt heavy, pressing in on me. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering, my breath fogging the laptop display. I dragged the timeline forward by a few seconds, and that was when I saw it, the faintest outline, almost transparent, of a hand, resting on my 5-year-old shoulder. I froze. It wasn't my mother's hand. It wasn't anyone's I could recognize. It was too big, too pale, too still. My voice shook as I whispered, "What are you?" But the only answer was the soft hiss of static, echoing like a whisper through the empty room. After seeing that hand on my shoulder, I didn't go near the VHS player for 2 days. I told myself I needed space, that it was just an old tape playing tricks on me. But no matter how many times I tried to distract myself, my thoughts always circled back to that shadow, and the way it seemed to inch closer every time I looked at it. By the third night, I gave up pretending I could ignore it. Something inside me whispered that the answers weren't in the tape. They were in this, so I went back up to the attic. The air felt heavier, almost damp. I switched on my flashlight and scanned the corner. My mother's handwriting stared back from every box, careful and organized, the way she'd always been. But I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for clues. I started with the boxes labeled personal. Inside were old photo albums, faded receipts, and envelopes full of letters she'd written, but never sent. Most were to my father, though they stopped abruptly about a year before he left. One box was filled with journals. There were at least a dozen, each dated and stacked neatly. I picked one from the middle, a dark blue one marked 1998, 2000, the year I turned 5. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lavender. My mother's handwriting filled every line, neat at first, then increasingly shaky. I flipped through until a few words caught my eye. "Rowan's friend from the shadows came back today." My breath caught. I read it again, slower. "She talks to him when she thinks I'm not listening. Says he stands by the doorway during playtime. Leonard thinks it's imaginary, but the way she describes him, I don't know. I don't like the way she looks past me when she mentions him." I sat back, staring at the words. Friend from the shadows. That's what she'd called it. The more I read, the darker her entries became. At first, she sounded curious, even amused. But as the months went on, her tone shifted into something else. Panic. "He's not imaginary. She says he tells her secrets. She says he's always watching when she sleeps." The last few pages of that journal were smeared and uneven, as though written in haste. "He stood behind her in the living room today. I saw him. I swear to God, I saw him." I felt my stomach twist. My flashlight flickered, the beam jumping across the wooden beams of the attic. For a split second, the light caught something on the far wall. A faint smudge, like a handprint in the dust. My pulse spiked. I turned the light away quickly, trying to breathe. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about since childhood. It was late at night, and I was crying in my room. I remembered calling for my mom because someone was standing in the corner. I remembered her rushing in, whispering, "There's no one there, baby," while I pointed toward the wall. But I hadn't imagined it. I was certain of that now. I wiped my palms on my jeans and opened another box. This one labeled letters. Inside were old envelopes, some yellowed, others unopened. Near the bottom, I found one addressed to my father, written in my mother's handwriting but never mailed. The ink had bled slightly from age. I read the first few lines, my hands trembling. "Leonard, I can't keep pretending she's fine. You said we could control it, that keeping her away from mirrors would help, but it's getting worse. She says he touches her shoulder when she blows out the candles. We need to keep her safe." Safe from what? I read it again, tracing the last sentence over and over. Keep her safe. That same phrase, it felt like an echo from something I'd forgotten. I remembered my mother's eyes that day, the way she'd looked at me when she said, "Don't ever go in the attic alone." I'd thought she meant it because of spiders or falling boxes, but maybe she'd meant something else. I stood, scanning the attic. My flashlight beam glided across the rafters, the boxes, the dust. Something in me knew there had to be more, something she'd hidden. I moved aside an old trunk, nearly sneezing from the dust cloud it kicked up. Behind it, I saw a panel of insulation that looked slightly off color, like it had been removed and replaced. My fingers were shaking as I peeled it back. Behind the insulation, there was a small space, barely big enough for a shoebox, and inside, there was a box, smaller than the others, wrapped in old newspaper and tied with fraying string. I pulled it out, my pulse pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. The box was light. When I untied the string and peeled back the paper, I froze. Inside was another VHS tape. This one was different. No cheerful handwriting, no labels about birthdays or memories. Just a single piece of masking tape with words scrawled in thick black ink. "Do not watch." My hands went cold. I stared at it for a long time, debating. Every instinct told me to put it back, to pretend I'd never found it. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, kept whispering that I needed to know. Maybe it held proof. Maybe it would explain everything. Maybe it would show me what my mother had seen. I carried it downstairs slowly, like it was something fragile or dangerous. The house was silent except for the faint creaks of the old wood. The TV sat waiting. The VHS player still plugged in from before. I turned on the lamp. The yellow light flickered across the walls. My reflection on the dark TV screen stared back at me, pale, uncertain. "Just one look," I murmured. My thumb hovered over the tape slot. My chest felt tight, like the air itself was warning me not to do it. I slid the tape in. The gears whirred. The machine swallowed it. TV blinked to life. The screen flickered, static first, then color. The camera was shaky again, handheld. The timestamp in the corner showed the same year as the first, 19. My breath caught. The room looked the same. Same balloons, same cake, same party. But the tone felt off. There was no laughter, no chatter, no music, just silence, broken only by the faint hum of the... Then, my 5-year-old self, she looked straight into the camera, her expression blank, her eyes wide and serious. And then she spoke. "Hi," she said softly. "He told me you'd find this." I froze. My throat went dry. She tilted her head, her little voice calm, too calm. "He says I can tell you now." I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the static. And then she said a name, one I didn't recognize. As I pressed play, my 5-year-old self began speaking directly to the camera and called out a name I didn't recognize. The name my 5-year-old self spoke didn't sound familiar, but it hit me like a memory half buried in ice. I replayed the line again, straining to make it out. "Hi," my child voice said softly on the screen. "He told me you'd find this." A pause, then the name again, clearer this time. "Eli." I froze. The word felt heavy in my chest, echoing in my ears. I'd never known anyone named Eli. Not in my family, not in my childhood, not anywhere. Then, in the video, the little version of me smiled faintly. "Look," she said, pointing just behind her. "He's here again. He's my brother." The camera shifted slightly, catching the edge of the doorway. The figure was there, still, silent, standing closer than ever before. I hit pause. The image froze, my tiny arm pointing back toward that dark silhouette. My father's voice came faintly from behind the camera, nervous, shaky. "Rowan, sweetheart, don't!" Then static swallowed the rest. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My brother. No, that wasn't possible. I'd always been told I was an only child. My mother used to say, You were our miracle baby. We didn't think we could have another after you. There were no photos of any other child in the house, no baby clothes or toys that weren't mine. I felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted under me. I needed answers. Real ones. I spent the next hour searching through every family photo album I could find. Birthdays, holidays, school recitals. In all of them, it was just me. My parents, smiling. Me, in the middle. Never anyone else. Still, the tape had my mother's handwriting. She made it herself. So why would she film something like that? Why would she let me say something so strange unless it was true? By evening, I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to talk to someone, anyone who might remember. The only person left was my mother's older sister, Marla. She lived 2 towns over, in the same house she'd shared with my uncle before he passed. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. When she opened the door, she looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of holding things in. "Rowan," she said softly, "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to ask you something," I said, skipping past small talk. "It's important." She frowned, stepping aside to let me in. Her house smelled faintly of old furniture and cinnamon tea. I didn't sit down. "Marla," I said, my voice trembling. "When I was little, did I have a brother?" The color drained from her face almost instantly. She looked at me as though I'd said something dangerous. "Why are you asking that?" "I found a tape," I said. "From my 5th birthday. There's a name on it. Eli. And I said he was my brother." She gripped the arm of a chair, steadying herself. "Rowan, I think you've been through a lot lately. You're probably remembering things wrong." "I'm not remembering anything," I snapped. "It's on film. I saw it. He's in the background. A figure, tall, standing behind me." And I said his name. Her eyes widened slightly at the word figure. She looked toward the window, avoiding my gaze. For a long time, she said nothing. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the kitchen. "Marla, please," I whispered. "Just tell me the truth. Who is Eli?" Her lips trembled. "You need to talk to your father," she said finally. "He's the one who made the decision." "What decision?" She didn't answer. She just shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't do this again. I'm sorry." When I tried to press her, she turned away. I could tell she was terrified. Not of me, but of something older. Something she'd promised herself never to speak of. I left her house feeling hollow. The sky had gone gray, a slow drizzle blurring the roads as I drove back. I didn't want to, but I knew what I had to do. My father, Leonard, had been living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town ever since the divorce. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not out of hatred, but out of exhaustion. He'd always been distant, even when I was a kid. When I arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner, older, with hands that trembled when he opened the door. "Rowan," his voice cracked on my name. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said, "but I need to talk to you. It's about Mom. And about me." He hesitated, then stepped aside. His living room smelled faintly of old wood and dust, a muted echo of my childhood home. I sat across from him, clutching the digitized copy of the tape. "I found something," I said quietly, "in the attic. A video from my 5th birthday." His face tightened. "What about it?" "There's someone in it," I said. "A figure," and I said his name, Eli. He froze. His hand went still halfway to his cup of coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't have watched that." I leaned forward. "So it's true? Who is he?" He looked away, his eyes glassy. "You were never supposed to find out." "Find out what?" I demanded. He covered his face with his hands. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then his shoulders began to shake. Through broken sobs, he whispered, "You had a twin brother." The room seemed to tilt around me. I sat there, frozen, unable to breathe. "His name," he continued, voice trembling, "was Eli." I stared at him, trying to process the words. "Why didn't you tell me? Why would you keep that from me?" He looked up, his eyes red and wet. "Because he's gone, Rowan. He's been gone since you were 5. My throat tightened. "Gone? You mean he died?" My father nodded slowly. "We thought it was best to let you forget. You were so little. You didn't understand what happened. Your mother thought—" His voice cracked. "She thought if we pretended he never existed, you could grow up without the nightmares." I felt sick. I could barely hear him over the sound of my own heartbeat. I reached into my bag, pulling out the USB drive that held the digitized tape. "Then explain this," I said, my voice shaking. "Explain why he's still there. Why I can see him, why he's standing right behind me." He didn't look at the screen when I played it. He didn't need to. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "You don't understand," he said, voice cracking. "Eli isn't—" He stopped. His chest heaved with silent sobs. Finally, he looked up at me. His voice was barely a whisper. "You had a twin brother," he said again. "His name was Eli." He hesitated, and then leaned forward, eyes wild, voice trembling. "But Rowan," he whispered, "Eli never existed." For a long time, I just sat there across from my father, unable to speak. The words kept echoing in my head, looping like a broken record. Eli never existed. "What does that even mean?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. "You just told me he was my twin brother. You can't say he existed and didn't exist. Which is it?" My father looked like he hadn't slept in years. His hands trembled as he rubbed his face. "It's complicated," he whispered. "You were very young, Rowan. Too young to understand what was happening back then." I leaned forward, desperate. "Then explain it to me, please." He sighed, his voice low, defeated. "You had an imaginary friend. You called him Eli. You talked to him all the time. At first it seemed harmless. Kids have imaginary friends, right? But it got worse." I frowned. "Worse how?" He hesitated before answering. "You started saying he lived in the shadows. You draw him on the walls, whisper to him at night. You told your mother he followed you." My skin prickled as he spoke. "And you believed that?" "We tried not to," he said. "But your mother started seeing things too. She swore she'd catch glimpses of him, reflections in the window, movement behind you in the mirror. She started filming you, trying to prove to me that she wasn't losing her mind." I swallowed hard. "That's what the tapes were for." He nodded slowly. "I told her it was just her imagination feeding yours. But after your 5th birthday, she stopped recording altogether. She said the last video scared her too much." I thought of that tape, my child self looking at the camera, saying his name. "Eli?" I shook my head, the anger rising in my chest. "You're lying," I said. "I saw him. He's not imaginary. He's there, Dad, on film. You can see him. He's standing right behind me." He flinched at my tone, but didn't argue. He just stared down at his hands. "Sometimes," he said softly, "belief is stronger than memory." That sentence didn't make sense to me. Nothing he said did. I left his house trembling, furious, and more confused than before. When I got home, the sun was already setting, painting the walls of the living room in dull orange light. I plugged in my laptop and opened the digitized copy again. I had to see for myself. As the video played, I leaned in close, scanning every frame. The birthday candles flickered. My father's voice murmured something indistinct, and there, in the background, that same tall, dark shape. I paused, squinted, adjusted the contrast. The figure didn't look like a shadow. It looked like a person. I could almost make out the edges of a sleeve, the curve of a shoulder, and when I stared at it too long, my eyes began to play tricks on me. Or maybe it wasn't a trick at all, because for a split second I thought I saw it move. A flicker, just enough to catch the light. I slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering. My reflection in the black screen stared back, pale and wide-eyed. I started noticing things after that. Small things at first. Movement in my peripheral vision, a shape where there shouldn't be one. My hallway mirror would catch something shifting behind me, and when I turned, nothing was there. At night, I'd hear faint whispers, like a radio signal too weak to understand. I thought maybe the sound was coming from my laptop. When I opened it again, the video file started playing on its own. Only this time, the audio was warped. Distorted whispers crawled beneath the familiar laughter. I couldn't make out the words, but every so often, one cut through the static, clear as day. "Eli!" I slammed the lid down again, shaking. Something was wrong with this house. Desperate, I went back up to the attic. I told myself I was just checking, that I needed to make sure there wasn't some logical explanation. But when I reached the top of the stairs, my flashlight beam landed on the far wall, and my blood ran cold, scratched faintly into the wooden beam, almost invisible under layers of dust, was a single word. Eli. I stared at it, my breath catching. I reached out, touching the letters with trembling fingers. The edges were rough, like they'd been carved years ago. No one else had been up here since my mother died. No one but me. I backed away slowly, the beam of my flashlight quivering. I didn't want to be up there anymore. When I got back downstairs, I called Nora. I told her everything, about the carvings, the whispers, the videos. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finally stopped talking, she exhaled. "Rowan," she said carefully, "I think you need to talk to someone." "You mean a therapist?" "Yes," she said. "You've been under a lot of stress. Losing your mom, being alone in that house. It's enough to make anyone's mind spiral." I didn't argue. Maybe she was right. So the next morning, I made an appointment. The therapist was polite, gentle, the kind of woman who smiled too easily. Her office smelled of eucalyptus and new carpet. When I told her about the tapes, about the figure, about Eli, she nodded slowly and said, "Sometimes our minds hold on to trauma in strange ways. You could be remembering something your parents tried to shield you from, but it's on tape," I said. "You can see him. He's right there." She tilted her head. "Old tapes degrade over time. Light, shadow, static. It can all look like movement. What matters is how you feel about what you're seeing." I stared at her, frustrated. "I feel like I'm being haunted." Her smile faltered, but she kept her calm tone. "Then maybe it's time to let yourself stop watching it." I left the office feeling worse than before. It felt like everyone thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was, but that didn't explain the carving or the whispers. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house settling. Every creak made me jump. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that I was imagining it all. But then, around 2 a.m., I heard it. Soft, distant, the sound of a child laughing. It came from upstairs, from the attic. My heart seized. I sat up, frozen in the dark, my ears straining. The laugh came again, short, breathy, playful. I didn't want to move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay where I was. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe fear, pushed me to get up. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the beam steady. Step by step, I climbed the ladder to the attic, the old wood creaking beneath me. The air up there was cold, colder than it should have been. My breath came out in faint clouds. Then I saw it, the TV screen glowing softly in the corner, the VHS player whirring quietly, its wheels spinning. The tape was playing by itself. After that night, I couldn't convince myself to leave the house. Every time I thought about packing a bag, something stopped me, as if the walls themselves didn't want me to go. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion, stress, or the grief catching up to me. But every night, the same sound woke me, that faint, breathy laugh drifting down from the attic. And each morning, when I forced myself to look, the VHS player would be sitting perfectly still, the screen black as though nothing had ever happened, except sometimes it was warm to the touch. By the end of the week, I started noticing something else. Every time I went up there, the air felt colder, not a natural kind, bone-deep chill that wrapped around me the second I stepped off the ladder. I started wearing a coat just to go up, but it didn't help. The cold came from somewhere else, from the tape. The VHS player sat on the floor now, plugged into nothing. I'd made sure to unplug it, but as I stood there, breath fogging in front of my face, I could hear the faint whirring, the reels spinning slowly. It wasn't possible. The machine was humming. The play button itself, dusty and half dead to life. And there it was again. My fifth balloon, the banner on the wall, the same loop of laughter and clapping, the same moment when my father's trembled slightly, but something, the colors looked wrong, washed out. My child self's laughter had warped or water, and somewhere beneath a low whisper rose and fell, almost like breathing. I tried to stop it. The buttons wouldn't respond. The remote didn't work either. The video just kept playing. My 5-year-old self leaned over the cake, ready to blow out the candles. Behind her, the doorway was empty for a split second. Then, movement. The figure stepped forward. It was moving now, slow, deliberate. One step, then another. It passed through the edge of the frame, gliding rather than walking, and for a brief moment I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't shadow anymore. It had shape, arms, legs, a faint suggestion of a head tilting down toward my smaller self. I felt sick. I couldn't look away. The screen flickered. Static burst, the image breaking apart, and when it returned, the angle had changed. The camera was no longer filming the room. It was filming me. The perspective had shifted, low, unsteady, as if someone were standing in the doorway looking through their own eyes. I saw my 5-year-old self from behind. I saw her leaning over the cake. I saw her tiny fingers brushing her hair aside, and then she looked up, right into the camera, right at him. The whispering grew louder, words tangled in static. I slammed my palm against the power button, but the TV refused to turn off. The image wavered, colors bleeding together, and the screen flashed again, this time showing me, right now, standing in the attic. I screamed, stumbling backward, heart hammering in my chest. The sound of the tape stopped suddenly, dead silence, before the machine ejected it on its own, sliding it halfway out. I didn't think. I just grabbed it and yanked it free. My fingers were shaking so violently that the tape reel inside cracked. The room fell silent again. For a moment, I thought it was over. I stood there, trying to slow my breathing, listening to the old beams creak overhead. My heart finally began to steady until I heard a soft buzz from my pocket. My phone screen was glowing. One missed call. No number, just a name that shouldn't exist. Eli. I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. My contacts list didn't have that name. My father hadn't even saved it under anything. It wasn't possible. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the callback icon. The screen flickered again. Then, before I could do anything, it started ringing on its own. I froze. My reflection stared back at me from the phone screen, pale and terrified. The ringing stopped. Then a voice, soft, childlike, barely above a whisper. Come play. I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. The sound continued, echoing from the floor, the voice stretching and warping through the speaker. Come play, Rowan. The attic light flickered overhead. I backed toward the ladder, my pulse roaring in my ears. Who are you? I whispered. The voice giggled. Don't you remember? I could barely breathe. My voice cracked as I said it again, louder this time. Who are you? For a few seconds, there was only static. Soft, fuzzy, pulsing like a heartbeat through the phone speaker. Then the voice returned, whispering so close it felt like it was right beside my ear. I'm you. The attic light went out. For days after the phone call, I could barely tell what was real anymore. I stopped answering Nora's texts. I barely ate. The house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a memory trying to erase itself. Every time I walked into a room, I half expected to see a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The attic door stayed shut, but somehow I could still hear faint sounds drifting down, soft humming, like a child's lullaby, warped into something hollow. I kept thinking about what the voice had said. I'm you. The words replayed in my head until they didn't sound human anymore, just a vibration in my skull. Sleep came in fragments, sharp and colorless, and every time I drifted off, I'd see flashes of my 5th birthday. The candles, the smiles, the cake, and something else behind it. Someone else. At first I thought it was Eli, but then I realized what I was remembering wasn't someone standing beside me. It was me standing beside him. I woke one night covered in sweat, gasping for air. A memory had clawed its way up from the dark, sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, talking to an empty space. I could still hear my own child voice saying, "It's your turn now." I grabbed my mother's old journals again. Maybe the answers had been there all along. I flipped through the later entries, the ones written right before she died. Her handwriting had grown frantic, looping, uneven. He's not outside her anymore. He's inside her. She talks in her sleep. Sometimes I hear 2 voices. The twin inside her mind wants out. I felt a chill creep up my spine. All this time I'd thought Eli was a real boy, a twin I'd lost. But what if he wasn't? What if he was something my mother had invented to explain something else? Something wrong with me. The lights flickered. At first I thought it was the storm outside, but then I realized the pattern wasn't random. The lights flashed in quick bursts, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The static started next, a faint buzz that filled the silence no matter where I went. It was in the TV, the outlets, even the old radio in the kitchen that hadn't worked in years. I unplugged everything, but the static didn't stop. It was inside the house, or maybe inside me. Time began to slip after that. I'd lose track of hours, sometimes whole days. I'd find myself standing in places I didn't remember walking to, in the backyard at dawn, barefoot, or sitting on the kitchen floor with the lights off. Once, I woke up in the attic, the VHS player humming quietly beside me. The tape wasn't playing. It was just spinning, endlessly, like it was waiting for me to press play again. When? I told myself it was just exhaustion. I found proof it wasn't. One afternoon, Nora showed up unannounced. She looked worried, pale. "Rowan, I've been calling you for days," she said. "You haven't answered." I blinked at her, confused. "It's only been 1 day." She shook her head. "It's been 4. Before I could respond, she glanced up toward the ceiling and frowned. "What's that sound?" We both froze. From above us came the faint hum of static, then the soft, sing-song rhythm of "Happy Birthday." I went cold all over. Without another word, Nora followed me up the attic ladder. When we reached the top, the air was icy. The TV was on, glowing faintly, and I was standing there. At least, someone who looked like me. For a split second, I saw my own body from behind, hair falling over my shoulders, head tilted slightly to one side as I hummed the birthday song. Nora gasped. I blinked, and the figure was gone. She backed toward the ladder, shaking. "Rowan, we need to get you help." But I couldn't move. The hum of the TV filled my ears. The screen was black, but the reflection staring back wasn't mine. After that, Nora stopped visiting. She texted once, suggesting I find a therapist again. I didn't respond, because deep down, I already knew this wasn't something a therapist could fix. The next night, I set up my phone on the nightstand and hit record before I went to sleep. I needed to know what was happening when I lost time. When I watched the footage the next morning, my stomach turned. At first, it showed me sleeping soundly. Then, around 2:14 a.m., my body sat up. Slowly, mechanically, my eyes opened, but they didn't look like my eyes. I stood, turned toward the camera, and smiled. Then I walked out of frame. I fast-forwarded. The next thing I saw made me scream. The camera shook, the frame glitching, but I could still make it out. Me, standing beside my own bed, head tilted slightly, lips whispering. The audio warped with static, but one word came through clearly. Eli! I dropped the phone. My pulse raced, room spun. If Eli was never real, then what was this thing that looked like me? I went to the attic again, desperate for answers, for something solid to hold on. The air felt electric, the hum louder than ever. The flickering light bulb above me buzzed like it was about to burst. The TV blinked on by itself. The image that appeared made my knees buckle, but not as a child. It was my adult self standing in the background of the same birthday scene. The figure had changed. It wasn't tall and faceless. It was identical to me. Same hair, same clothes. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I finally understood what my father had meant. Eli never existed, because Eli wasn't another person. He was me, a part of me that never went away, a name my mother gave to the pieces of me that frightened her. The twin, inside my mind. The birthday I'd celebrated again and again in my dreams wasn't a memory. It was a fracture. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, trying to breathe. The attic swam around me in flickers of light and shadow. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I noticed something. Behind the beam near the far wall, the same one where I'd found the other tapes, something glinted faintly in the dark. I crawled toward it, hands trembling, brushing away layers of dust. There, wedged between two boards, was another small box. This one was older than the rest, sealed shut with brittle tape. Faded writing stretched across the lid in my mother's uneven handwriting. The last birthday. My breath hitched. My hands hovered over it, shaking. Something inside me whispered not to open it, to leave it buried. But I couldn't. With trembling fingers, I peeled back the tape. The box creaked as it opened. Inside was one more VHS tape. No label, just a single word scratched faintly into the plastic. Last. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse roaring in my ears. And then I whispered the words, I wish I never had. I shouldn't have opened that box. I stared at the VHS tape for a long time, the word last carved into its plastic like a wound. The air in the attic felt dense, thick with the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. My fingers trembled as I reached into the box again. Underneath the tape were photographs, curled at the edges, colors fading into sepia. I spread them across the floor. The first showed my mother, sitting in the backyard, cradling a child in her arms. Her eyes were red from crying. In the corner of the picture, there was a small plastic pool, the kind you fill for children in the summer, half collapsed, water spilling across the grass. At first I assumed she was holding me, but then I looked closer. The child in her arms was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a blue shirt, not pink, and on the back of the photo, written in my mother's handwriting, were two words. Only one. My breath caught in my throat. Another photo. This one inside the house. My father sitting on the couch, head in his hands. My mother standing behind him, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her face was turned toward the camera, but her eyes weren't focused on it. She looked hollow. Every picture told the same story. Grief, silence, something missing. I set the photos aside, heart pounding. The tape sat in front of me, daring me to touch it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to bury it like my parents clearly had. But the other part, the one that had been haunted for weeks, needed to know. I carried it downstairs, my knees weak, and slid it into the VHS player. The machine whirred, crackled, and the screen blinked to life. The date in the corner was the same as before, my 5th birthday. But this time, the camera wasn't in the living room. It was outside. The new image was shaky. Someone running across the yard. The sound of wind rushing past the microphone. Laughter echoed faintly. Children's laughter, mine, and another voice. Higher, lighter. Then the camera steadied. I saw myself, 5 years old, wearing the same pink dress, chasing after a small boy in a blue shirt. He was running toward the pond at the edge of the yard, the one my mother had always kept fenced off when I was older. Rowan, My mother's voice called from behind the camera. Don't go near the water. The boy turned. For a second, I saw his face. He looked just like me. The same eyes, the same nose, the same terrified expression when he realized how close to the edge he was. Then everything happened at once. The camera jolted as my mother screamed, Eli, no! The picture blurred, spinning as she ran. There was a splash, loud, sharp, final. The camera hit the ground, the image sideways now, showing nothing but grass, water, and chaos. I heard crying, my mother's voice, breaking, begging, my father shouting. The sound of splashing turned into silence, and then the tape went black. I sat frozen, unable to breathe. The truth was so much worse than I could have imagined. Eli had existed. He was real, my twin brother. The name I'd spoken as a child wasn't a creation. It was a memory. I was there when it happened. I'd seen him fall, and my mind, unable to cope, had buried it. The shadow in the tapes, the figure standing behind me, wasn't some ghost, wasn't an invention of grief. It was him, Eli. He'd been with me all along, frozen in that day, trapped behind the flicker of static and time. My parents had erased him from my life to protect me, to make sure I'd never remember. But somehow, through those tapes, he'd found a way back. I pressed my hands against my face, sobbing. I'm sorry, I whispered through the tears. I didn't know. I didn't remember. The TV hummed softly, the tape still spinning. The image flickered back to life, grainy and distorted. Now it showed the pond again, calm and still. The surface reflected the trees and sky like glass. Then, movement, a ripple. I leaned closer. Something beneath the surface was shifting. Slowly, a shape began to rise, faint at first, like a trick of the light, then clearer. It looked like a face, a child's face. My pulse raced. The camera was still filming, but the image began to distort, flickering between the pond and something else. A reflection. My reflection, except it wasn't smiling. The water rippled again, and suddenly the camera view twisted, as if whoever was holding it had turned toward the house. In the window, I saw a woman standing inside, my mother, watching, her hand pressed to the glass. Behind her, in the dark reflection of the window, was that same faint outline, the tall shadow, the same figure from every tape. Only now I realized what it truly was. It wasn't the shadow of a ghost. It was a reflection of a boy standing beside her, standing where I should have been standing that day. The static deepened, the sound warping into something that almost resembled breathing. Then, through the distortion, I heard a faint whisper. You left me. My body went cold. I tried to stop the tape, but the buttons wouldn't respond. The screen flickered faster, cycling between the pond, the house, and a distorted close-up of my child self crying on the grass. Then the sound cut out completely. For a few seconds, there was only the hum of the machine. I reached forward to eject the tape, and the TV turned off by itself. The room plunged into darkness. I stared at the blank screen, heart pounding, my own reflection barely visible in the glass. Slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I saw movement behind me in the reflection, a faint shimmer like a second shadow. My breath hitched. I turned around. Nothing. When I looked back at the screen, the reflection was still there. Only this time, the figure standing behind me wasn't a shadow. It was clearer, smaller, childlike, and it was smiling. The TV flickered once, static crawling up the screen like veins, and then, faintly, the birthday song began to play again. Warped, distorted, the melody slowed until it sounded like a funeral hymn. I whispered his name one last time. Eli! The TV went black. I thought it was over. I really did. But as I turned to leave, the VHS player clicked softly. The tape began to rewind on its own, and through the faint reflection of the dark screen, I saw a small face looking back at me, smiling. But as the tape ended, the reflection in the screen smiled, and it wasn't mine. After the screen went dark, I sat there for what felt like hours, the hum of the VHS player still faint beneath the silence. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, pale and hollow-eyed. Behind it, that faint outline lingered, smaller than before, but unmistakable. Eli. The next morning, I decided it had to end. I couldn't live like this anymore, surrounded by ghosts and half-memories. Whether he was real, imaginary, or just a piece of my fractured mind didn't matter. He had to go. I gathered every tape I'd found, the birthday ones, the unlabeled ones, even the last birthday. I stacked them in the metal bucket my mother used for ashes, carried it out to the backyard, and poured lighter fluid over them. The sharp, chemical smell filled the air. My hands trembled as I struck the match. The flame caught quickly, curling along the edges of the paper labels. Smoke rose in thin ribbons, gray and acrid. I waited for relief, for that sense of release that comes when you finally destroy the thing haunting you. But it didn't come. The flames flickered strangely, bending toward me instead of away, and the air felt suddenly heavy, suffocating. And then, from inside the house, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a click, followed by the faint whirring of gears. I turned toward the open back door. The VHS player had turned itself on again. I ran inside. The smell of smoke clung to my hair, the faint glow from the flames still visible through the window. The TV screen flickered weakly, static pulsing across it. "No," I whispered. "You're gone." But the image formed anyway, faint at first, then sharper. It was the pond. Still water reflecting the gray morning sky. My childhood self stood beside it, wearing the pink dress from my 5th birthday. Her small hands were clasped in front of her, her expression calm. Then the camera panned slightly, and Eli was there. He stood beside her, holding her hand. His hair was wet, clinging to his forehead. His smile was small and sad. The two of them turned toward the camera, toward me. My throat tightened. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the sharp ache of guilt that had been building since the moment I'd learned the truth. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know. I was just a kid. I didn't mean to leave you." Eli tilted his head, his eyes glinting faintly through the static. For a moment I thought I saw him mouth something, but the sound was gone. Just a hum, low and steady, vibrating through the floorboards. Then, as if in response, my child self on the screen reached out her hand toward him. He took it gently. The image began to fade. The pond shimmered, light distorting the edges of the frame. For a heartbeat, everything froze, and then the TV blinked off. The room went completely still. I stared at the black screen, heart hammering. Slowly my reflection began to emerge again, faint, ghost-like. But this time, I wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside me, smaller, shoulder to shoulder with mine. We were both smiling. I stepped back, the air leaving my lungs in a trembling gasp. The reflection stayed exactly where it was. I whispered his name once more, voice breaking apart. "Eli." Nothing answered, just silence. That night, I didn't dream. The static was gone. The house was finally quiet. For the first time in weeks, I slept until morning. When I woke, sunlight filled the room, soft and golden, the way it used to when I was a child. Everything looked normal. The TV was unplugged. The VHS tapes were nothing but ashes in the bucket outside. A few days later, Nora came by to check on me. I hadn't seen her since that day she found me. She looked cautious, studying my face. She wasn't sure who she'd find. "You look better," she said carefully. "Are you sleeping now?" I smiled, or at least I thought I did. "Yeah, I think I just needed to let go of some." She glanced around the house. "It feels different in here. Lighter." "Yeah," I said softly. "It's quiet now." We sat together for a while, drinking tea, talking about nothing important, but I could tell she was still uneasy. Her eyes kept drifting to me, like she was noticing something she couldn't put her finger on. At one point, she frowned slightly. "Your voice sounds different," she said. "Softer." "Does it?" I asked, tilting my head. She smiled nervously. "Yeah, just a little." I laughed lightly. Or maybe we did. When Nora finally stood to leave, she gave me a long hug, as if she wasn't sure it would be the last time. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said. "I will," I whispered. "Promise." She hesitated before stepping outside. I watched her through the window as she walked to her car. The sunlight caught her reflection in the glass, and for a brief second, I thought she froze. Her eyes widened. Then she shook her head, blinked hard, and climbed into her car. When the engine faded down the road, the house fell silent again. I turned back toward the window. Our reflection was waiting. Two of us, side by side. He stood a little behind me now, his small hand resting on my shoulder. Our smiles were perfectly matched, calm and quiet. Somewhere deep in the house, a faint sound began, slow at first, then growing louder, the hum of static, then a familiar melody, soft and warped, echoing from somewhere unseen. "Happy birthday to you." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks, but this time they weren't from fear. Maybe this was what peace looked like. Maybe letting go didn't mean saying goodbye, just remembering together. The song faded, replaced by a small burst of laughter, light, joyful, echoing through the empty halls. I turned off the lights, letting the darkness fill the room. The reflection remained in the glass, two figures framed in shadow, both smiling. And for the first time, I smiled too. I don't know if Eli was ever gone. Maybe he's always been here. The part of me that stayed 5 years old forever, waiting by the pond, waiting for me to come back. As the static hummed softly from somewhere deep within the walls, I whispered one last time, to him, to myself, to whatever was still listening. Some birthdays never end. Some people think the past stays buried, that old memories fade and disappear. But I've learned the truth the hard way. The things we try to forget, they don't leave us. They wait, in the corners of old houses, in the flicker of static, in the reflection that shouldn't be there. And every time I close my eyes, I still see that pond, and the boy who never stopped waiting for me. Some stories aren't meant to be found, but once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. If this one made you feel something, a chill, a memory, a question you can't shake, you already know what to do. Tell me, if you found an old tape of your childhood, would you dare to watch it till the end?